Now let's continue with the Sonic series review. It took until the Sega Dreamcast came out for there to be a proper 3D Sonic game, and that was Sonic Adventure. This is the first installment of the series to actually have a proper storyline, and moreover, you got to experience it from 6 different angles through the courtesy of multiple playable characters. You can see why this game is widely considered to be the best of the 3D Sonic games. The gameplay is a lot of fun with Sonic and Tails' speedy levels. I also really like the gem hunting levels with Knuckles. And you also get to play as Amy, Gamma, and Big the Cat. Now, even though this game has a lot of content and polish, not to mention an excellent soundtrack from Crush 40, there are things about it that annoy me a little bit. The biggest thing is that not all the characters get very long plot lines. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are okay, even if most of Tails' levels are just altered versions of Sonic's levels. But I really hate that Amy and Gamma only get a handful of levels, because I honestly would have liked to have played more as them. As for Big, yeah, it's probably best that you play as him the least. Also, I don't really like the hub world, and this is something I wish they'd get rid of in most 3D platformers. The game is essentially linear, and you don't even need to revisit levels in this game in order to progress. So, the hub world just becomes an unnecessary thing that you have to visit between levels. I do like it when they hide power-ups in there, but I don't really understand why they couldn't just move to the next level by a cutscene. And also, some of the cutscenes have no background music, which really just makes them feel hollow and weird. Despite my belly aching though, Sonic Adventure is a really good game, but I think Sonic Adventure 2 just improved on it a lot. This time you only have 2 story scenarios, the heroes and the villains, but conversely you get to alternate playing as 3 different characters, and that just makes the game feel more interesting, since you're not just doing the same thing from level to level. Also, there's no hub world, and every level ends with a cutscene that moves you to the next stage. Now that's what I'm talking about. The story is definitely more straightforward, but the villain side of it is pretty interesting. This game introduced Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat. Now, even though Sonic has far exceeded his evil doppelganger quota multiple times over, Shadow is probably the only Sonic lookalike I ever liked, and he's really central to this game's storyline, which makes him very interesting. And Rouge, well, she's really the first interesting female protagonist from the games. Sorry, Amy. You don't really find out much about Rouge, and I think that helps to add a lot of ambiguity to her role in the story. Plus, this game has a much more varied soundtrack. It still has a lot of rock music like the previous game, but thanks to all the levels with Knuckles and Rouge, also a nice blend of rap and R&B music as well. Now, I'm not saying Sonic Adventure 2 is flawless, and in fact, it is a little rough around the edges in certain aspects. A couple of the levels can be borderline infuriating. I'm looking at you, Shadow. And also, annoyingly, in some of the cutscenes the voice clips overlap, which seems incredibly slipshotty of the Sonic team. But conversely, the cutscenes are much better and more dynamic than in the previous game. So if you want to fix the problem, you can always switch on the Japanese voiceover from the menu. All in all, Sonic Adventure 2 just vastly improves on the first Sonic Adventure, and for me, this is easily my second favorite Sonic game out there. It's not a timeless masterpiece like Sonic 2, but I just love playing it, and it puts me in a good mood. Now, there's a bit of a gap in my Sonic gaming days between Sonic Adventure 2 and when I returned to the series. There wasn't any particular reason for this, I just didn't get around to playing a lot of Sonic around that time. And I of course knew about Sonic 06 and about the general fare of things at Sega. The next official Sonic game that came around was Sonic 4, which went back to the 2D axis, although the graphics were still in 3D. Also, the game was released episodically, but only Episode 1 was released on the Wii, and I had to later get Episode 2 on Xbox 360. Even though they're supposed to be 2 halves of the same game, I rather feel they're 2 different games. But for the interest of keeping this review tidy, I'll just cover the basics. The controls of Sonic 4 are still more in line with the 3D games than the 2D ones, meaning that the spin dash is actually pretty useless. In Episode 2, you also get Tails as a partner, and there's many sections where you get to use him to get past the levels, although you don't actually play as him. The music and graphics are nice, but especially in Episode 1, the game feels a little bland. And honestly, I wouldn't have minded some storyline since I had gotten used to it in the Sonic Adventure games. Instead, the game seems to rehash a lot of things from the Mega Drive era Sonic games, and while some of the stuff is pretty neat and pulls on my nostalgia strings, I just would have preferred if they had come up with their own original takes on the levels. I do like how the music changes in the different zones, and there are 3 levels per zone, which is nice. However, Episode 2 is where I think Sonic 4 just goes awry. Episode 1's biggest problem in my view were its overlong and confusing levels, but it wasn't insanely difficult, and I quite enjoyed it. Episode 2 features many levels that have parts where you have to learn the sequence of movements immediately, or you just die. The ice levels were my least favorite in this regard, but it's a general annoyance in this game. Some of the levels were designed by absolute sadists. Overall, I wasn't really impressed with Sonic 4. For all it's worth, it's a fun game, especially the first half, but it just doesn't offer anything new you wouldn't get from other installments. Then came Sonic Generations. This was the 20th anniversary release and a crossover between the classic and new school Sonic titles. It features levels from every major installment, which you have to complete both in 2D and 3D form. I like the meeting of the old and new Sonic, and I particularly like the cutscenes, which are very lively. The story isn't anything special, but it's an anniversary title, so I don't think it needs to be. This one is literally all about nostalgia. I think the levels are great both in 2D and 3D. You do still have some issues with the camera in the 3D levels, but it's not too frequent. In fact, my only genuine complaint is that you only get to play as other characters in the bonus stages. Beyond that, the levels are fun and the remixed music from each installment is just excellent. I also felt the game wasn't too hard or too easy, and they picked the levels from each game with enough variety so you won't get bored. It is a rather short game, but again, I'm gonna have to forgive it since it is supposed to be an anniversary release. It's more suited for anyone who loves unlocking things, but even just as a simple Sonic game, I found it really enjoyable. Not a groundbreaking title, but then again, it clearly wasn't meant to be. Then we come to Sonic Lost World on the Wii U. And I'm gonna have to start my review of it by saying that I don't think I've ever had more mixed feelings about a Sonic game. The first half of this game is brilliant. I love the kooky level design, the story, cutscenes, and even the gameplay feels really solid, even if they added a run button instead of using the momentum system that everyone is used to. Then halfway through the game, right around the ice levels, is when the shit switch gets flipped. Oh my god, I hate the ice levels in this game. And really, every level past this point becomes a real grind to get to the finish. I also thought making the animals you rescue from the enemies become collectibles was a terrible idea. It's not bad if I could always conceivably gather enough so I wouldn't have to backtrack that much, but instead, you wind up replaying old levels over and over again to rescue the little assholes. This shit really infuriates me about 3D platformers, especially when they're clearly designed to be linear. Why am I forced to play the levels at the beginning? Not that I mind that much, since the first 3 worlds are the best, but seriously, I'll replay the levels if I feel like it. The relentless difficulty really starts to bite when you get to the final levels, which are insane. Yet the final boss fight is probably the easiest in the whole game, so it's almost like a weird cheat in a way. Now I want to stress, there are a lot of good things about Sonic Lost World, which I do hope they will revisit in future games, but there is also a lot of annoying shit. Thanks for watching, I'm TheHande, see you on the next one.